If you've ever stood at the edge of a garden in late July, watching the first tomatoes blush red on the vine, you know there's no feeling quite like it in the world. There's something almost sacred about it. You planted a seed, you watered it, you worried over it through the cold nights of April and the dry weeks of June. And then, one morning, you walk outside with your coffee still warm in your hand, and there it is, that deep, heavy cluster of fruit hanging right where you put your faith. For a lot of us who've been growing tomatoes for decades, that moment never gets old. But there's another moment most of us know just as well, and it's not nearly as sweet. It's the morning you walk out and notice it, a dark smudge on a lower leaf, a ring of brown creeping in from the edges. You lean down and your stomach drops, because you've seen this before. You know exactly what it is. Blight. And if you've ever lost a tomato crop to late blight, you know how fast it moves. One week, your plants are lush and tall. The next, they look like they've been scorched from the inside out. The fruit goes soft before it ever ripens. Whole plants collapse. And all that work, all those early mornings, all that hope, just gone. Most of us reach for a spray, a fungicide from the garden center, something in a plastic bottle with a long list of warnings on the back. We follow the directions, we treat again the following week, and sometimes it helps for a season, but it comes back. It almost always comes back. For a long time, I accepted that as just part of growing tomatoes. Blight was the price of the harvest. You dealt with it or you gave up. Then, about 11 years ago, I spent a summer visiting family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, right in the heart of Amish country. I was staying with an older couple, Eli and his wife Ruth, who had been farming the same land for over 40 years. Their property sat at the end of a long gravel lane surrounded by fields of corn and kitchen gardens that ran nearly the full length of the house. I noticed one morning that their tomato plants were extraordinary. Tall, thick-stemmed, heavy with fruit, and not a single dark spot on a single leaf. While my garden back home was fighting blight every August like clockwork, Eli's tomatoes looked like something out of a seed catalog. I asked him about it. He smiled, the way people do when they've known something for a long time and are happy to finally share it. "Sour milk," he said. "We've done it this way since my grandfather's time." I want to share what Eli showed me that morning because it changed the way I grow tomatoes, and I think it might do the same for you.
Eli Baylor had the kind of hands that tell a story before a man ever opens his mouth. Wide across the palm, darkened from decades of sun, with soil worked so deep into the creases around his knuckles that no amount of washing ever quite got it all out. He was in his late 60s when I met him, but he moved through his garden the way younger men move through a room they built themselves, unhurried, certain, like every square foot of it was an old friend. He'd been farming that same plot of Lancaster County ground since he was 19 years old. Before that, he'd worked it alongside his father, and before that, his grandfather had broken the original soil, hauling rocks out of the field by hand in the spring of 1951 to make way for the first kitchen garden. 3 generations, same land, same methods, passed down the way Amish knowledge tends to travel, not through books or YouTube videos or garden center pamphlets, but quietly, over shared work, one pair of hands teaching another. That's something I've come to appreciate about Amish farming. There's no trend cycle, no new product launch every season, no reason to try the latest thing just because the latest thing is being sold. If a method works, you keep it. If it stops working, you trace back through what your father did and his father before him until you find where the wisdom got lost. They are, in a way, the longest-running gardening experiment in America, and they've been quietly winning it for over 170 years. Ruth, Eli's wife, was the one who first brought up the tomatoes. We were sitting at their kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in late August, and she'd set out a plate of sliced tomatoes alongside breakfast, deep red, firm, still faintly warm from the garden. I mentioned, almost in passing, that I was struggling with blight back home. My plants were half gone by that point in the season most years. I'd started buying fewer seedlings in spring just to soften the disappointment. Ruth looked at Eli. Eli looked at me. "Do you spray?" he asked. I told him I did. The standard stuff from the hardware store. He nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd suspected. That's why it keeps coming back, he said. You're treating the leaf. We treat the soil. He pushed his chair back and said simply, "Come." We walked out through the back of the house and into the garden. It was a long rectangular plot, maybe 60 feet from end to end, bordered on both sides by low wooden stakes and heavy twine. The tomato section ran along the south-facing fence, where the plants could catch full sun from morning to late afternoon. There were 8 varieties growing there. I counted them, 8, and every single plant was clean. No spotted leaves, no yellowing at the base, no telltale dark rings creeping in from the edges of the foliage. In late August in Pennsylvania, when humidity sits over the fields like a wet blanket and blight pressure is at its absolute peak, Eli's tomatoes looked the way mine looked in early June, healthy, vigorous, completely unbothered. I knelt down and looked at the soil around the base of one of the plants. It was dark and loose, with a faint, slightly sour smell that I didn't recognize at first. Not unpleasant, almost fermented. "What is that?" I asked. "That," said Eli, "is what keeps the blight away." He explained it to me as we walked the row together. The method had come down from his grandfather, who had learned it from his own father before him, a practice that stretched back, by Eli's reckoning, to sometime in the 1890s. It had no formal name in their community. Nobody had written it down. It was simply what you did, the same way you planted by the moon or saved your best seeds at the end of the season. It was knowledge that lived in practice, not on paper. The core of it was this: diluted sour milk, or more precisely, raw milk that had been allowed to sour naturally over several days, applied directly to the base of the tomato plant and occasionally as a foliar spray on the leaves, beginning in early June and continuing every 10 to 14 days through the end of the season. That was it. No fungicide, no copper spray, no neem oil, no complicated mixing ratios or application schedules, just soured milk applied consistently to both the soil and the leaf surface. I'll be honest with you, my first reaction was skepticism. I've been gardening long enough to have heard a lot of folk remedies, and most of them don't hold up. I've tried eggshell calcium treatments, banana peel fertilizers, garlic pest sprays. Some work a little, most don't work at all. The idea that sour milk could stop blight, one of the most aggressive fungal diseases in the temperate garden, sounded more like superstition than science. But then I looked at those 8 tomato plants again. Late August, full humidity, prime blight season. Not a spot on them. Eli watched me looking, and I think he understood the exact calculation I was running in my head. He'd probably watched other outsiders run it before. "My grandfather never lost a crop to blight," he said quietly, "not once in 50 years of growing." I stood up, brushed the soil off my knees, and decided I was going to go home and try it. But before I tell you how to do it, and I'll walk you through every detail, I want to explain why it actually works, because this isn't folk magic. There's real science behind what Eli's family has been doing for over a century. And once you understand the mechanism, you'll never look at a bottle of fungicide the same way again. Ruth was already back in the kitchen by the time Eli and I settled onto the low bench at the edge of the garden. He'd picked up a tomato leaf on the way, a healthy one, deep green, slightly waxy on the surface, and he turned it slowly between his fingers while he talked, the way a man does when the thing he's explaining is something he's thought about for a very long time. I want to share everything he told me that morning. I've since spent a good deal of time reading the science behind it, and what I found confirmed what Eli already knew in his bones. So I'll give you both, the method as he taught it and the reason it works. Technique 1, the sour milk soil drench. The foundation of everything Eli's family does starts not with the leaf, but with the ground beneath the plant. Beginning in early June, about 2 to 3 weeks after transplanting, Eli mixes 1 part naturally soured raw milk with 4 parts water. He applies roughly 1 cup of that mixture directly to the soil at the base of each tomato plant in a slow pour that lets it soak in rather than run off. He does this every 12 to 14 days, without fail, through to the end of August. The soil is where the disease starts, he told me. Most people look up at the leaves. We look down. He's right, and the science backs him up. Late blight, caused by the pathogen Phytophthora infestans, overwinters in the soil and spreads upward through water splash. Fungal spores live in the top layer of earth around the plant's base, waiting for the warm, humid conditions of midsummer to activate. What sour milk introduces to that soil is lactic acid bacteria, specifically lactobacillus strains that proliferate naturally during the souring process. These beneficial bacteria are intensely competitive organisms. They colonize the soil around the root zone and create an environment that is actively hostile to fungal pathogens. The pH shifts slightly. The microbial balance tips. The fungal spores that cause blight find themselves crowded out before they ever reach the stem. This is not a poison, it's a displacement, and it's one the soil actually benefits from.
Technique 2, the foliar spray. Every 3 weeks, not every week, Eli was specific about this, he takes that same diluted sour milk mixture and applies it as a light spray directly onto the leaves of the tomato plant, top surface and underside both, early in the morning so the liquid has time to dry before the heat of the day sets in. I asked him why not more often. Too much and you get mold on the leaf, he said. You're not trying to drench it, you're leaving a trace. That trace, it turns out, is doing something remarkable. When lactic acid bacteria dry on a leaf surface, they leave behind a thin, nearly invisible film. That film alters the surface chemistry of the leaf in a way that makes it inhospitable to the germination of fungal spores. Blight spores need moisture and a receptive surface to take hold. The bacterial residue disrupts both conditions simultaneously. Studies on fermented plant-based sprays and lactobacillus foliar applications have documented reductions in fungal disease pressure of between 60 and 80% in field trials. Eli didn't know those numbers. He just knew that his grandfather's plants stayed clean, his father's plants stayed clean, and his plants stayed clean. Some knowledge arrives through research, some arrives through 70 years of watching. Technique 3, the milk and mulch combination. This was the detail that surprised me most and the one I think most gardeners overlook entirely. After each soil drench application, Eli covers the base of every tomato plant with a fresh layer of straw mulch, about 2 inches deep, pulled slightly away from direct contact with the stem. He does this immediately after the milk drench soaks in, while the soil is still damp. The mulch keeps it working, he said simply. What he means is this: lactic acid bacteria are living organisms. Like any living thing, they need a stable environment to thrive. Bare soil exposed to direct afternoon sun heats to temperatures that kill the bacterial colony you've just introduced. The mulch layer moderates soil temperature, retains the moisture the bacteria need to survive, and creates a protected zone where the microbial community can establish itself and hold. Without the mulch, the drench is half as effective. Eli's family has always done them together, the milk, then the straw, without necessarily understanding the biology of why, but the biology is exactly right. The mulch layer also serves a secondary purpose. It physically blocks the upward splash of soil-borne spores during rainfall, 2 lines of defense built into one simple step. Technique 4, starting before you see the problem. I want to dwell on this one because it's the piece I got wrong for the first 2 years after I learned these techniques. Eli starts his milk drench program in early June, not when he sees the first sign of blight, not when the weather turns humid, in early June, weeks before any disease pressure appears. By the time you can see it, it's already been in the ground for a month, he told me. He's describing the invisible window, the period between initial pathogen presence and visible symptoms that most home gardeners never account for. We treat reactively. Eli's family treats prophylactically. The bacterial colony needs 3 to 4 weeks to establish fully in the soil around the root zone. If you wait until blight appears to start, you're already behind. Begin in June. Work consistently through August. Stay ahead of what you can't yet see. That, more than any individual technique, is the lesson I carried home from Lancaster County.
I drove home from Lancaster County with a jar of sour milk on the passenger seat and something harder to name sitting quietly in my chest. It wasn't just that I'd learned a new technique. Gardeners pick up new techniques all the time. A better way to stake tomatoes, a smarter planting depth, a trick for extending a season by 2 weeks. You try it, it works or it doesn't, you move on. This felt different. What Eli had given me wasn't really a method. It was a reminder that the most reliable knowledge in a garden is often the oldest knowledge, the kind that was never written down because it never needed to be, because it was simply lived, season after season, by people who had no reason to stop paying attention. We live in a time when there is no shortage of information about gardening. There are apps and forums and entire YouTube channels dedicated to every conceivable aspect of growing food. And yet, blight still devastates home gardens every August. Fungicide sales grow every year. The problem doesn't get smaller. Eli's grandfather never had access to any of that. What he had was observation and patience and the willingness to pass what he learned to the next pair of hands coming up behind him. There's something worth sitting with in that. A garden is never really just about this season's harvest. It's about what you learn while growing it, and whether you're willing to carry that forward to your children, to your neighbors, to anyone who asks why your tomatoes look the way they do in late August. Eli shared it with me. I'm sharing it with you. That's how this kind of knowledge stays alive. If you've made it this far, I have a feeling you're the kind of gardener who takes this seriously. Not just the harvest, but the whole of it. The soil, the seasons, the slow accumulation of things learned and passed on. That's exactly the kind of person I made this for. If something in this video resonated with you, if it reminded you of a gardener you once knew, or gave you something worth trying this coming season, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button and subscribe. It's a small thing, but it helps this channel reach more people who grow the way you do, quietly, carefully, with real respect for what the ground can teach us. And if you try the sour milk method this year, I genuinely want to hear how it goes. Leave a comment below and tell me, what variety are you growing? Have you dealt with blight before? Did your grandmother or grandfather ever use anything like this in their garden? I read every comment, and some of the best things I've learned have come directly from the people watching these videos. There's one more thing before you go. Next week, I'm going to share something Eli told me just before I left that morning. A simple trick his family uses at the end of the season to pull the strongest possible immune response out of their tomato plants before the first frost. It takes about 10 minutes, it costs nothing, and it means your saved seeds carry more disease resistance into the following year. It's the kind of thing that sounds almost too simple to matter. Those are the usually ones worth paying the most attention to. I'll see you then.